couple political pros, Democratic pollster Margie Omero and Republican strategist Hogan Gidley. Margie, I want to start with you here. You heard this conversation we've been having on sort of the policy side and the reporting in the states. What are the politics here? And does it matter that you've had so many national Republicans come in and say, as we mentioned, no to this Arizona bill, but not necessarily come on board with a lot of these other advancements?
Well, it shows that many in the Republican Party recognize that they need to move a little bit toward the middle, toward where the majority of Americans are. And remember, a majority of Americans now support gay marriage. And there are a lot of Republicans who, I think, privately support gay marriage. The problem is you have a faction of the Republican primary party that votes in primaries that is pulling the party further to the right than I think the party knows it needs to be. And I know that's, I think, where you'll see the party end up further a long way from now. I don't think you'll see this year a lot of Republicans leaders coming out for gay marriage, but the fact that you saw this huge backlash against the Arizona bill shows at least some recognition that they need to move a little bit more to the middle, which is good progress politically and policy-wise for everybody. Yeah,
well, let me go to Hogan on this. You're a Republican and you've worked for Republicans who have very different views on this issue, and yet you know, as we're discussing, that Republicans under the age of 40 do overwhelmingly think that marriage equality is a settled issue, and they support it. And this is one of those issues where people don't change their minds that much. If they tend to go for support, we don't see in the polling a lot of people then go 5 years later and change their mind. So if this is the future of the Republican Party, when do you think it becomes the present of the Republican Party?
Well, I mean, look, the president himself changed his mind, so it's obvious some people don't have a problem changing their mind on the issue. But you did mention a strong faction within the Republican Party that I would call the Bible-believing Christians, who will never change and can never change because of their fast-held beliefs to the Bible. Let me jump in there.
Let me jump in there, and I'll give you a chance to respond. I'm not trying to cut you off, but you say that, and I understand that there are strong religious beliefs here. We've definitely mentioned and reported on that. But as we all know, religious beliefs can strongly undergird opinions that ultimately change. We all know religion was cited repeatedly in a different context for racial segregation, and then people moved on. And a lot of religious believers today, Judeo-Christian believers, do not look at their teachings anymore as a justification for that.
Well, that's because that was perversion of Scripture. Look, Scripture doesn't change, right? I mean, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the same yesterday, today, and forever, the evangelical would tell you. And because they believe that way, to use Scripture in a way to propagate some type of segregation is just flat out wrong, and it's a misuse of Scripture. So that's a whole other separate topic altogether, Ari.
Okay. Well, look, I don't want to go too deeply theological, and you might just win that debate if it comes to certain parts of the book that I don't know as well. But what I also want to get in is the politics on 2016. To both of you, Margie, first.
Sure.
Are there going to be Republicans here that decide when they're running that they need to actually be the first mainstream Republican presidential candidate to be open to marriage equality? Margie first.
You know, I mean, it would be great. I think there are some Republicans who might be a candidate for doing that. I don't know if that's a winning strategy in some of these early primary states. I don't know if you can win Iowa or you can win South Carolina in the Republican primary if you are that candidate. If you are the only candidate, is there an argument if you're the only candidate of a pack who says, I'm for gay marriage, do you win over some group that wants a candidate who is quote-unquote electable, this phrase that we've seen before? We'll see. I mean, that strategy, it has not always been effective in the Republican primary. So whether that's going to be a different climate in 2016, I don't know. I hope so, for the sake of our collective political discourse and for the LGBT community around the country, that we are not continuing to relitigate a fight in our politics that the American people are now moving and seem to have decided. I hope that's not the case, but I fear that we're still going to see these divisive debates come up in these primaries.
Hogan?
But part of this is a branding issue that Republicans have clearly lost. Early on, remember, this was gay marriage, and it seemed like the homosexual community wasn't really getting much traction on that. Then it went to marriage equality, and you've seen successes at every level of government. This Arizona ruling is no different. It's not so much the backlash, I think, that will cause to make people to rethink their positions on this politically and otherwise, but it's not the backlash per se, but I think it's the victory from the homosexual community. They've been content with winning victories at every level of government government over the course of decades, whereas the Tea Party swings for the fences every time. The homosexual community seems as though they're happy getting a single, a double, a triple, which will ultimately result into what they want, which is a marriage equality for everybody.
Yeah, well, and I think what you're talking about, and it's always a debate of strategy over how much incrementalism you want versus absolute principles, right? And the Tea Party fashions itself very principled. Sometimes that's run them into a brick wall of practicality. Even Republicans have said that. I think when you refer to what's happening here and what we mentioned in our setup here is that it's bigger than politics, because the culture is finding there are so many more gay Americans who are relatable, who are just like everyone else. And it gets harder and harder to say the government, I think, from including a conservative perspective, and as I mentioned, I think, quite honestly, from a religious perspective, it's harder and harder to say it's the government's role to restrict how we reflect that love that people may choose to have privately as a public society. I mean, it's a tough issue, and I know there's people of good faith on both sides of it, but
and
that's a big... Go ahead, briefly.
I would argue also that it's well beyond simply the LGBT community. There are a lot of folks who've been fighting for marriage equality, and it's beyond the LGBT community, its supporters, and now it's a majority of Americans.
Right, exactly. Well, look, I appreciate having you both on today. I hope we can talk about it again. Margie Omero and
Thanks,
Hogan
Ari.
Gidley, thank you.